Hey, this is Eric from Catching Light.
Hey, this is Hemp.
Hey, this is Glenn.
Hi, I'm Steve-O.
Hey, this is Drew Hines with Hindsight Imagery.
This is Matt Callahan at Digimatty Photographic Services.
Hey, this is Jason, and welcome to Tales from the Pit. Hello and welcome to Tales from the Pit, the behind-the-lens access for concerts and photography. Today we have Bad Wolves guitar player, Doc Coyle. Doc, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
And thank you for having me.
Excellent. So we usually like to start off with a little bit of a history of our guests. So can you give us some background about maybe how you got started with music, how you got started with guitar, and kind of give us a brief sort of history?
I don't think my story is too different from a lot of young people who get into rock and metal or whatever, and then therefore get inspired to pick up an instrument. I was a child of the 90s and the MTV era, and I saw Megadeth video, Symphony of Destruction, kind of turned everything on for me. And then Wayne's World came out and I saw that the section with Queen, and then I saw the Guns N' Roses video for November Rain, and I got into Metallica and all that stuff. Just something about that age. I was 12 or 13 years old, and Slash, I just saw that guy and the way the guitar sounded and the melody. Just, I don't know, I was compelled and ended up picking up an old acoustic. I don't even know where it came from or how I acquired it. I really don't remember it. It was out of tune and strings were probably an inch off the fretboard, but somehow I just started plucking around on it, messing with it. My dad saw it, ended up, the girlfriend he was dating at the time ended up loaning us, my brother and I, this Ibanez Les Paul copy, and that was just a game changer. Get to have an actual electric guitar, and my brother Dallas also started playing guitar around the same time, and we just kind of pushed each other and challenged each other. He'd learn something, and I'd want to top him, or vice versa. And we were just listening to all these records and kind of getting into heavier and heavier stuff, and stuff that was very guitar oriented. So we started watching Headbangers Ball and getting into Slayer and Pantera and Sepultura, and then started listening to local radio stations and getting into death metal and just the most extreme stuff we could find. And then we discovered the hardcore scene. And there was bands like Candiria and Dillinger Escape Plan and Overcast and Cave In, and kind of that really expanded our perception of what you could do musically. And yeah, so it was this really eclectic kind of everything mishmash of all the versions of heavy music. But at the same time, I still liked all the grunge stuff and started getting into classic rock as I got a little bit older and more, I guess, stuff that's on the, whether it might not even be rock, stuff like Radiohead and things like that. And so I, by the time I was in my early 20s, I had a pretty expansive influence base, I would say.
Now I think did you grow up in the Jersey area, in Jersey?
I grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So you're kind of, that's kind of, I'm in Portland, Maine. I think New England has a very heavy, so does Texas and a few other spots, but I being close to New York and New Jersey, did you have a lot of shows you could go to that were in, sort of set that spark for you and stuff like that, going to shows in the early days?
Yeah. Discovering the hardcore scene was a real game changer. The first show I went to was in 1996. It was Pantera, White Zombie, Deftones.
Damn.
And then I think the second show I went to was at this place called the Birch Hill Nightclub. It was Biohazard. And that was a couple years after the fact. Well, actually, sorry, that's actually wrong. Went to the Pantera show, then started going to hardcore shows. And the next kind of real show I went to was that Biohazard show a couple years later. But getting involved with the hardcore scene kind of, you go to a Pantera show in a arena and there's 10,000 people there. That feels really inaccessible. And I was very young, still in high school, and then discovering this hardcore scene with some really, really skillful bands and original music, stuff I hadn't heard before, understanding there was different kind of rules to making music and all these different things you could do. And the great thing about it with New Jersey was the diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, you had bands like E-Town Concrete that were mixing hip hop and hardcore. You had bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, like I said before, that was doing this math infused noise thing that was just, you never heard anything like that before. You had emo bands like Thursday coming up around that time. You had bands coming up in the new metal scene like 40 Below Summer and El Nino. And we were kind of a group of musicians that had a real traditional metal background in terms of what we liked, be it Machine Head or Pantera or Metallica. And then we just kind of absorbed all this stuff. And you get in the hardcore scene, you do a show and there'd be a grindcore band and a straight edge hardcore band and a punk band and a screamo band and everything in between. And so the live shows of that era, it was really a meeting point, because back in the day, before the internet was as big as it was, there were these enclaves of great scenes, and New Jersey was one of them. Long Island had a great scene. Philly had a great scene. Syracuse and New York, certain parts of Massachusetts. And you just saw that, like, a lot of the things that would get really big a few years later would happen in New Jersey first. So the emo thing was bands like Jimmy Eat World and At the Drive-In. That stuff was happening. Those bands were playing like little spots in basements a couple years before they became really big. So it was a really special time. It was a real cross section of, you had record labels, Trustkill Records, Ferret Records out of New Jersey, great venues. So it was, sometimes it's just right place, right time. And you feel unfortunate because you can be in a place that's kind of like a desert for culture where you're not exposed to so much great stuff. Yeah.
I mean, you're right in that prime spot. How does, so when you're doing, when you're actually getting out there and starting bands and stuff like that, how does that grow for you? How does your band go from, I'm assuming going from, I assume you're probably just a small garage band, and then you guys could sort of grow through that process. Can you take me through some of that?
Well, the thing is, we never had another band. It was the first time we ever jammed together. It was myself and my brother, who were either 15 and 16 or 16, 17. I can't remember. We went over and jammed in a basement with Corey, who was a drummer from God Forbid, and Byron, who became the singer, was playing guitar at the time. But then we were playing guitar, so then he started playing bass, and this guy Robbie was singing. And then eventually there was a fight with him. We didn't have a singer. Byron left the band because he went to school. And then we had another bass player. And then Byron started singing because we did this demo. But we had different band names. We were called Manifest Destiny. We did some really bad demos, like 3-song demos. Then we changed the name to Insalubrious after the Carcass record. Necroticism, descanting the Insalubrious, something like that. I'm probably screwing it up. And then eventually became God Forbid, and was right when our bass player Beaker joined around 97, 98. But we just weren't good. We were a bad band. But me and my brother were in high school. The other guys were a couple years older. But we had this, when you do you go in the studio and say, oh, we're gonna do a demo, and you listen to it, you're like, that's after the fact, you know it's not that good. And then we did our first show at this place called the Court Tavern, which was been there forever, kind of legendary place. And we play the show, and maybe a couple of your friends come, or your dad comes, and it's not that good. And we had this keen awareness that we weren't that good. But it was this very slow thing where every time we did a demo, it got a little better.
Right.
Got a little tighter. And it's slowly but surely. So by the time, we were jamming from like 96 to 98. And by the time we became God Forbid, and John Beaker had joined the band on bass, we just had discovered a lot more music. We had a better understanding of the scene to a certain degree, and we wrote this song called Mind Eraser, which was basically the first God Forbid song.
Yeah.
And it was extreme, and it was fast, and it was angry, and we were like, we think this is it. And then we made this demo called Out of Misery, which became like a CD EP, and it was the first thing we did that wasn't terrible, that we actually would play for other people, and people were like, oh, that's pretty good. Because we would release it as demo tapes, and this guy, Brian Bonilla, who worked at this record store, asked if he could put it out. So when you start getting a little bit of external validation,
Right.
that, oh, maybe we're pretty good, but the whole way through, we always were operating from the standpoint of a lot of humility, that, oh, those are good bands over there. Meshuggah's a great band. At the Gates is a great band. We're just like some guys in a basement. Like, we always had this, like, we put our heroes on like a pedestal.
Yep.
Because we just admired the skill. And back then, it was a different era when you couldn't get a great recording if you didn't have money or a label.
Right.
And you couldn't sound great on an album without playing great. It was no Pro Tools to line everything up or tune your
Copy and
vocals.
paste,
So it was all about so the idea was to have a great record, you had to be a great band.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was all about rehearsing and working on our instruments and getting better and learning how to write better and getting tighter. And really, it was just so organic. It's a completely different mindset now, and I'm sure you've seen this, where the band, everyone kind of sounds good on record, but yeah, is that really them? Are those real drums?
Right.
Can the singer really hit those notes?
How does it translate live? Yeah.
But the funny thing is, even now live, a lot of that
That's
stuff
true.
can be false or replaced or whatever. So it's just a completely different world. But we just had this framework of feeling like an underdog, feeling humble, not feeling like we were at the position. And then something slowly but surely kind of clicked to go, okay, no, we're pretty good. Because when we started playing shows in the hardcore scene, we would do shows and we go, we're better than all these bands. But it went from thinking we were terrible to somehow it's like a race, right? Where you kind of end up lapping people without realizing it. And next thing you know, you're two ways around. You're like, okay, we're pretty good. And then it's being a big fish in a small pond. And then you get a record deal. And now all of a sudden I imagine, let's say you're a high school player who's the big deal, and then you go to college, and all of a sudden it's like, now everyone's just as good as you or better. And then you have to prove yourself on that playing field as well. And you kind of start all over from the bottom again. Yep. And you're getting, and then you're getting to see great bands every day when you tour with them. And that's a great learning experience as well.
So when you first start touring, are you touring like just the East Coast? Are you actually hitting the, nation? What's your first major tour?
Well, at first we put out a record called Reject the Sickness in 1999. And around that time and a little bit before, we would do regional stuff and weekends. There was this band called For the Love Of, which was a New Jersey band that was extremely influential to our music from a creative standpoint, but also took us under their wing and would take us out. They would do shows and invite us along. So a lot of the first times we got to play at a state was with this band. They really helped us out. But our first actual tour was in 2000, the summer of 2000. We did 8 shows with Shadows Fall and All Out War.
Nice.
And that was all, it's 8 shows. So it was all Northeast, Pittsburgh, Albany, Cleveland. But it was even though it was 8 days at that time, and I was just barely, I was less than a year out of high school. It just like the whole world opened up. And then talking to the Shadows Fall guys, and I remember talking to Matt Bakan from Shadows Fall, the guitar player, and he was telling me he had a record label, and he's like, yeah, this is what we do. And they had toured a few times, and it never kind of occurred to me that you could do this as a job.
Yeah.
Because the whole time we were doing the band, we were landscaping or working shitty jobs, and
Right.
the getting to go to a rehearsal, work on music was kind of the reward. That was your fun time. That was your free time, but you always had school or you had a shitty job. And so it was kind of like something clicked where it became, all of a sudden, this thing I didn't even think about became something to yearn for, something, it became a goal. So right around that time, we got our record deal with Century Media Records, and we recorded an album called Determination at the end of 2000, and it came out first quarter 2001. And between that time, we had linked up with a management company called the Syndicate, and this guy Dave the Rev Ciencio, and we kind of got put on, like we had a machinery that actually made things happen beyond our control that we really had no capacity to do. So essentially they set up our first tour right before the album came out. It was kind of an amalgam of a couple tours. We went out with this band Diecast.
Yep.
And it's supposed to be this band Shutdown. It was like a hardcore band on Victory, but they ended up dropping off. And then we did about 3 weeks with them. And then we did 2 weeks with Amen. I don't know if you remember them, old Roadrunner band.
I think so, yeah.
Shadows Fall. And then we did a few more. We did like another couple weeks with Diecast. And probably the biggest show we ever did in this whole run was maybe 500 people. Actually, we did we did the Super Bowl of hardcore. Maybe we played in front of 800, 1,000 people. But other than that, 50 people,
Yeah.
100 people, 20 people. But when you're first touring, you don't really know any better. You're just happy, you know, and you go out for 6 weeks. You kind of come back, you're kind of a different person. You get a taste for this lifestyle.
Yep.
And so from that point on, we just toured. I mean, we did 6 or 7 tours within like a year and a half, and it just kept getting bigger. And then we went out with Nevermore and Opeth, which was our first big metal tour. And that was
awesome.
And that's, for us, that's like the big leagues.
Right.
Then we went out with Cradle of Filth and Nile, and then all of a sudden we're playing theaters, and there's 3,000 people there. And that's the first time where we get to kind of see what a rock star lifestyle might be, or what that kind of looks like. Whereas these aren't shows, these are concerts.
Yep.
You know? And then we went out with 6 Feet Under and Lamb of God. We did stuff with Hatebreed. We did stuff with Poison the Well. We went to the UK for the first time that summer, and that was a game changer. And then we had some shitty tours. And we went out with Guar. We did all this. So we did a lot that first album, and you get kind of rewired to just like, this is our life. This is what we want to do.
Let's go back for a few. So a couple things that, I think you've talked about quite, regularly on your show, but when you guys were first getting your record label, and I think most bands have this misconception of what getting a record label really is to the band. Can you talk about that? What you guys experienced, what you guys thought was going to happen, and what really happened?
Well, one, I think it's important to say that it's a different industry then than it is now.
Right, very true.
This is 20 years ago. And really at that time, it was the old industry. This is physical sales. Physical sales peaked in 2001.
Right.
And that's when you had Limp Bizkit selling 1 million records in the first week, things like that.
Yeah, Linkin Park, all that stuff. Yeah,
all that stuff. I mean, you'd have a band, all those early new metal bands, their first records, they're selling 5 million copies, 8 million copies. It was insane. And so I think for us, there were so many more gatekeepers back then. And I think this idea of doing things completely independently was a lot more rare. And you felt like if you didn't have that seal of approval, that things were kind of cut off to you. And at the time, we were so broke. I mean, our first record, Reject the Sickness, the guy I told you who put out our first record, we had a deal with him that we were going to pay for half the record. And I think it cost $6,000. And we just didn't have the money. And we kind of left him holding the bag. Like, and you know, like I said, I was in high school.
Right.
And at the time, I mean, it was embarrassing, but we were broke. We had this rehearsal studio that was hourly, and we all like ran up tabs. I mean, you have like one guitar. You know, we were kids and we didn't have money. So the idea that there was a big difference essentially between if you didn't have money to go to a good studio with a good producer, your album was going to sound like shit. So it was this idea that if we don't have this money, then you lose access. It was a big deal. Like, so the idea that you could record something great at your house just didn't enter anyone's mind back then. So it was gatekeeper. So, and for us, you would look at a band, like we would get these compilations, right? These video compilations, Nuclear Blast, it would have 20 bands and it'd be Meshuggah and Dissection and Cataclysm and it'd be these bands from Europe and they might as well be from Mars, right? As far as you're concerned. And you felt like if we could just have that, there's something about branding of now I'm on this label, now we're official, now we're a real band.
Right.
Because we came up, you'd have to sell tickets to play a show. Why? Because you're a quote unquote local band. And there's a difference between a signed band or a national band and a local band.
Right.
So it's kind of, I guess, to a certain degree, kind of like getting a degree, right? Where we know you could probably do this job without the degree, but we're not going to give it to you because we need another institution to give you the seal of approval that you are. And it's so that's how it was kind of perceived back then. And we really needed extra monetary support. And we also did not have the skills to market a record, promote a record, do PR for a record. We just didn't know much about the music industry outside of local stuff.
Right.
Meaning, oh, we have a show coming up. Let's print up flyers and go hand them out. Outside of doing stuff like that, like the on the ground hustle stuff, we had no concept of how to do that stuff. So it was, and that in conjunction with our record label, we had a lot of people doing things for ourselves we didn't know how to do. And in some respects, that was also a big detriment of the band because we were more dependent on other entities. And the way we thought about being in a band is completely different than you think about it now. Whereas our job was to make albums and tour, maybe do some interviews. Whereas now your job is to do live streams and
content,
make videos, do playthroughs, there's all this interactive stuff and being available and being your own brand. And also you're expected to kind of do things on your own. You're expected to do your own album artwork or shoot your own video or record your own records. Right. And, so that whole social media change in the kind of mid 2000s from like 2003 to 2008 was a game changer. We were always a little bit behind the ball on that stuff. So, and that's stuff you kind of have to learn. And the bands, I say this, people ask me what the advice I would give any upcoming bands is just the more self-sufficient you are, the better. And all the bands that I saw that were able to negotiate better deals and were able to navigate the industry better, it was because they had people in the band that could record, people in the band that acted as a de facto manager, people in the band that could design the album covers. And you didn't need the label because remember, there's a cost to that. There's a reason why when you sign the deal, the label gets 85% and you get 15% because there's a service they provide.
Right.
And people don't really understand that. They think, well, it's unfair, but yeah, maybe by today's standards, where maybe a label doesn't do as much. And I think that's for certain labels. I mean, the label I'm on, well, Bad Wolves is on Better Noise. They do. They're like old school in that regard, where they have a machine. They're doing shit. They're not just sitting around. They're making stuff happen. And that's ultimately what you want. You don't just want someone to put a record out, quote unquote, and just collect a percentage.
Right. Exactly. So when you guys do the first, or not the first, but when you guys hit the road with the the other bands, you're what, 5 guys, 5 broke guys? Are you like renting a van? What is the setup for that first sort of major tour?
So my brother took out a loan to buy this van from our buddies in For the Love Of. And that's actually part of the reason why they would take us on all these weekend shows, was we bought the van. So we would throw all of our equipment in the one van, and then maybe everyone else would drive up in a car. So we just share those duties. So in many ways, this was really dumb, because we had this older van, and eventually we bought a new van, and it would break down. And so I mean, I can't tell you how many shows we had to cancel because of breakdowns on the tour. I mentioned that tour with Poison the Well. I think we only ended up doing 2 or 3 shows on that tour because our van broke down, and it was like a 2-week tour. So we couldn't go to Canada. And every show was sold out. And so when we first went out, it was, but keep in mind, it was like, there wasn't a car payment or anything like that. But if we were smart, and this is what I'm saying about not knowing anything, and we just didn't really know any better. I was pretty immature when I was younger and didn't really have a great understanding of business and all these things, because I never thought about a connection between band and music and money. Because when you're first starting out, you're paying to do everything, right? You're paying for rehearsal, you're paying for equipment, and you do it because you love it. And so if I had a better sense of that, I always think things could have been different. But if we were smart, what we would have done is, you get like an album advance. If we were smart, we would have taken like $5,000 out of that, make a down payment on a new van that is not going to break down, and then just make payments every month. And then after you use it for a year, then sell it, and then just do the whole thing all over again. If we were smart. But what we would do is we would take the $5,000 and buy a $5,000 van from 1997. Or whatever. At that time, it wasn't 97, it was probably an 87, but something. So yeah, we just made a lot of errors. So it's just the 5 of us, and we take turns driving. Stay at people's houses. You'd be at the merch booth, you'd have a little sign up, hey, or you leaving from the stage, hey, if we could crash anyone's house, that's what we would do. And then the first shows, you're making $50, $100, just enough for gas, maybe. Then when you get up to like, we're making $200 a night, it's like, okay, now we can get a hotel room now. Or I remember the first tour we had, when you get a trailer, it's like, oh, now we can lay out in the back and things like that. Or the first time you get a roadie, and that was a big deal, where you're not selling merch, you have someone to help you with that, or someone to help you drive. It was funny. The first roadie we ever had, this guy Hoss, his first night on the job, we're supposed to drive from New Jersey to Chicago overnight, and to play with this band 5.0, and a bearing seizes on the back wheel, flies off on Route 80. The van spins out with a tractor trailer bearing down. So we're facing around with the tractor trailers coming towards us.
Oh, geez.
There's a mountainside. We could fly off that. And then this hot liquid from the bearing comes out, and the wheel well's on fire. We're all asleep, and then the truck driver stops, rips open the door, pulls us all out. You thing on fire. Y'all need to get out of here.
Holy shit.
And we end up stuck in this town. And this is like to start the Cradle of Filth tour. This is his first day, our first time we ever had a roadie. And And that was his first day on the job. He quit smoking and he started smoking.
I'll definitely do it. No kidding.
Yeah. So almost died, but we ended up still making the first day of the Cradle Filth tour. We just missed all our warm-up dates, but we got stuck in this town in Pennsylvania for 3 or 4 days. It felt like we were there forever, but the things that make you.
Yeah, right. Those are the stories that really help build your, we should have done it differently next time. Or
we had a phrase. We actually had a song called "Assed Out," which is a ghetto term about having bad luck. That no matter what is going to happen with this band, we're assed out. But the thing about being assed out was it was a kind of accepting one's fate and not letting it bother you. Well, it was always going to end up like this. So what the fuck? Just hang out, grab a beer and ride it out. Just laugh at your pain.
Keep moving, learn your lessons and keep moving. Yeah. So from that point, now I know you've been in several other bands, or you've been a hired gun in some bands along the way. And I was just looking through your list here. Mattel. I don't know how the proper Mattel. Okay, yeah, the proper pronunciation. So yeah, so I think she was this drummer just exploded on internet.
YouTube.
And she was a killer drummer. YouTube, yeah, whatever it was, yeah, killer drummer, and had a killer song. And tell us about how'd you get involved with that?
So I quit God Forbid in 2013 summer, moved to LA less than a year later, without much of a plan other than I'm gonna give professional music another shot, whatever that meant. Just see what opportunities might avail themselves. And I was kind of just looking for whatever. And the guy who was producing the album and also writing a bunch of the material was this guy, Sahaj Tikatin, who is this lead singer and guitar player of the band Ra.
Yep, I know.
Had some hits in the early 2000s. And this time he would pretty much wasn't really doing the band guy thing as much and really mainly producing and songwriting. And he was developing this record with Maytal to create some original music as opposed to just being a cover artist. And I guess they were looking for a guitar player to do some live shows because they were creating a record, but they didn't have a band per se. And Paulo from Trivium, I guess, was speaking to Sahaj and my name came up, or he recommended me, and Sahaj reached out and just met up, kind of learned about the situation, met Maytal, heard the music. I thought it was really cool. Still think the music is actually really cool because it's this nice kind of blend between accessible metal and rock with a progressive flair. And, it was very hooky. And so, and then I found out that Travis Montgomery was going to be playing second guitar, and he was with Threat Signal and had toured with Jeff Loomis. And I knew he was a beast. And I met the bass player, Anel, who was just, really talented pro player. And so it was just like a cool situation. That's what I liked about it. I like just getting into weird scenarios and putting a band together, having a studio album that you're trying to translate and turn into a live thing. So it was a real experiment, but I don't know. Anytime I don't care what capacity I'm doing a band, whether it's doing some cover songs or something like this, where you're kind of building something up from the ground up. Excuse me. A band is a band, and it's all about bonding as human beings and hanging out and having fun and playing together, so it was fun. And it always helps when the songs are good and you like the people involved. So that's how it came about. We ended up doing a couple shows at the end of, I think it was 2014, and then some time passed, and then we ended up doing a tour with Queensryche, and that was really fun.
That's awesome. And I think you just recently posted you guys pulling off some Dream Theater. Was that Pull Me Under? Was that band? Yeah.
So we were preparing for the tour, and we were talking about the set list, and I was like, I think we really should play a cover because you're known for a lot of people for playing covers.
Right.
And we had talked about doing Disturbed or System of a Down. And I looked and I found out she had done that cover, and I'm like, that would be the perfect song to do on this tour because it's Queensryche, and that's their fans will they'll know the song, and B, if we do it well, they're gonna kind of be like, holy shit, like that's not, people just don't pull that out of their back pocket.
Right. Yeah, no kidding.
And it took a while to come together, but I was 1,000% right. Like it was one of those things that if you didn't respect what we were doing, by the time we played that, you were pretty much on board.
Yep.
And we sounded great. The singer killed it.
Yep.
Travis Petrucci's his favorite guitar player, so he plays all that stuff perfectly, and I ended up doing all the keyboard parts, the keyboard lead parts, and it was fun. It was a challenge, but it was just, and I just like things like that. I love taking something and making it work, and if you have the players that can pull it off, it's a nice feeling.
Yep, definitely. So speaking of Ra, the guitar player for Ra, Ben, is actually from Portland, Maine as well. So I would see him a lot locally around a lot of shows and stuff like that. So that's pretty funny. So we kind of skipped over a little bit. Your move to LA, what was the driver for that?
Well, I mean, leaving, God forbid, was, I mean, in many ways, the defining decision of my adulthood, because that was the thing that focused all of my energy and passion from the time I was 16 years old until I was 32 years old. So literally half my life. And making that cut it's just a big thing because it's all I really knew. And I had come to the point where by the time I was ready to make that decision, I was just that. I was ready. And so all of a sudden I kind of looked around and I go, okay, I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have kids. I was bartending. I was teaching guitar a little bit. I was doing like a cover band, and I was kind of comfortable. I lived with my grandmother until I was 30 years old. And, I paid rent and stuff. It was still basically living at home, right, and that comfort and that safety net. And for the first time in my life, I was on my own and surviving. But I was like, I've always thought about moving to LA. I always liked it. Everything always felt elevated there. It always felt like this is where the game is. It's where it's happening. And so it was always very appealing to me. And I thought about moving there earlier, but I was like, you know what? This is the time. I have nothing to lose. And by the way, I ended up moving there 2014. I'm 33 years old, about to turn 34. For rock metal, I felt over the hill, because I do feel like it's a young man's game, especially if you're going out, hey, I'm gonna go make it. People don't go to make it when they're 34. They go when they're 21.
Yeah. Fresh out of school. Yeah.
So I did have a realistic idea of things. I didn't have any great expectations about what would happen, because I really went approaching almost this idea of a hired gun. Like maybe I could find a situation where it's already established and there's a paycheck. And I kind of realized right away that wasn't that appealing. Like playing with some artist, if I didn't like the music, was not something I could do. And so I was actually pretty lucky to find situations like the Maytal thing where I liked the music, and it was like, okay, this is right kind of where I'm at. Also, I ended up doing a couple of gigs in this band, The Killing Lights, which was ex Vampires Everywhere. Currently, it's I think Dead Girls Academy. But so I would just kind of find myself in these situations with bands, just seeing what could happen, along with doing studio work. And I had started maybe a year after moving there. I ended up getting a gig writing at VH1.
Let's talk about that. You were writing for VH1?
Yeah, I started doing writing going back to around 2009, 2010.
So songwriting, right?
No. Writing like articles.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So actual writing words.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And I started doing these opinion pieces about metal and the metal scene and the culture of metal for Metal Sucks. And they were doing all this stuff where they'd have just artists come on and do guest stuff. And I kind of became a regular writer, and I found I really enjoyed it. And I found to actually there was a great feedback where a lot of people would reach out and say they liked what I did, or I thought I was good at it. So I kept doing it, and I started my own blog, .co.net, and I started writing about other things besides music. I started writing about relationships. I started writing about politics. And then I started writing. They pitched me the idea to start doing a NBA column, because I'm a huge NBA fan. So I started doing that and writing about basketball, which I loved. And even so, when I moved to LA, in the back of my mind, I was like, it's something I really enjoyed, and I felt like I had a talent for. But I was like, I was kind of like trying different things and having some success. And so eventually I got the job as like the modern metal columnist at VH1, and it went really well and got me some steady income for the first time, because I was really struggling. And then I got hired to write another website called Creative Live, doing similar stuff, but more geared for musicians and kind of more in an educational capacity.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of becoming a more just versatile delver into different kinds of media and sharpening other skills, because I felt after God Forbid ended, it felt kind of irresponsible to just solely depend on music to make a living. And I think you just put yourself in a tough position to maybe have to take a gig, right, where you don't like the music, you don't like the people, because this is all I know how to do.
Right. And
it's just not a great spot to be in. And I think I learned something where you gotta, a lot of people with life, they'll have like a goal and they'll struggle to get that goal, because they're like, that's what I want to do. And they'll do it and they'll work real hard and they'll get some kind of so-so results. And I started to realize that some things aren't that hard. That sometimes you just got to let some things, like I started writing and I started getting a lot of attention. Like I do a post about music or guitar and it would get a little bit of attention. And I'd post an article and it would get, 5,000 views or something, and tons of comments, and people reach out to me. And I'm like, oh, okay. Just so people think that for something to work out, it has to be really hard, or that you have to blood, sweat, and tears. But writing came pretty easy for me. And so it was just, I call it going with the current.
Yeah.
Just let things kind of take you. Life will kind of take you where it needs to take you sometimes. And you don't have to grind everything out.
Yeah. And, one of the things I noticed about you with listening to your podcast and stuff like that is you have, in my opinion, you have this, well-maintained logic that I think based upon what you say, I think you observe and learn from those, where other people may just observe and just say, well, I ain't going to go that way or whatever. I think that your logic and your perspective on things really is something I don't want to say not a lot of musicians have, but not a lot of musicians maybe focus on. I really, think a lot of the things you say and a lot of the perspectives and the way you present things are very logical and make total sense the way you put them. But when you look at them in life, you just don't realize it that way. So I think that the way you bring stuff and the way you're putting it out there really makes sense. And, if you put your focus in that, then I think, like you said, a lot of that stuff starts to come a little bit natural to you because you're aware of what's going on and stuff like that. So I really think that the way you kind of, your perspective really makes a big, first of all, I like a lot. I agree with a lot of the things you say and, stuff like that. But I also think that I think more people could benefit by just observing and learning from situations instead of being offensive by the situation.
I had a situation where in my late 20s, late 20s, I was cheating on my girlfriends, right? And eventually they left me and my life kind of torpedoed.
Yeah.
And I went through this 2 or 3 year period of basically figuring out who I was,
Yep.
what I stood for, what my value system was, what really holding myself to account.
Right.
And I read this book called The 7 Daily Habits of Highly Effective People that really changed my life. And because it all, like, I don't believe in karma really, but I do. I think you do good things, right? And I say oftentimes, people think they do good things because, I'll get it. It'll get paid back to me. And I was like, that's actually the most selfish reason to do good things, because you think you're going to get a reward.
Right.
The reason why I don't rob you, right, is like, you see me like, oh, that guy robbed me, so now I got to go fuck him up, right?
Right.
So it's in my best interest not to rob you. Or
right.
if I kill you, then your brother is going to come try and kill me, right? And that's not a retribution thing. That's not a karma thing. That's just the literal science of action gets reaction. And
human nature, yeah.
So basically, and all these bad things that were happening in my life were of my own doing, right? So it was about, okay, me doing these bad things to my girlfriends will have all the, it's not karma, it's that I'm literally creating a space of dishonesty, of betrayal, of inconsiderateness,
right,
a lack of compassion. And I have to figure out how to make sure I do not do that to other people in the future, because bad things will happen, not because of karma, just because you are living in an environment that you are manifesting those outcomes.
Right.
So because of that, I think I always try and hold myself to account. And I say, when something goes wrong, what did I do to put myself here?
Yep. And
so I think that's something I don't suffer complainers very much. I don't, because I'm like, as what's his name? That guy, Gary Vaynerchuk, he's like, it's a 0% ROI. No return on investment, because no one gives a fuck.
Right.
It doesn't help you. And I just don't get into the blaming thing. It drives me crazy. So some people, everything that bad ever happened to them, they got a list of whose fault it is. And I just want to say, no, guess what? Maybe that person had a choice in it, but no, it's your fucking fault.
Yep.
And then there's also this concept of, like you said, using logic to understand something, but also to constantly to see that things change. And so you should change as life changes and you learn new things. So it's like never staying static and constantly updating your ideology, constantly testing the things you think you believe in with new information and say, okay, you believed this thing at this time, but now you've learned more. Would you just, and this kind of informs a lot of my political philosophy, where I think it is, I do have certain principles, but I think I've learned more about the way the world works. And that has informed how I kind of perceive a lot of these things. And because even though I disagree with certain people, I am completely okay with hearing that perspective and being okay with it. And also on my show saying something like, here's what I believe.
Right.
If you disagree with this, I totally get it. And I hope I'm not putting you off to what I'm doing, but I feel it's important for me to be honest, but I'm not doing it to piss you off I'm doing it because it's actually what I believe. So, and it's a tough thing to kind of navigate.
Yeah. And like I said, when I listen to your show, you always start your show off with sort of what you're going through and what you're feeling and stuff like that. And I tend to agree a lot with what you say. And, I think that everyone has a very different group that they grow up in that has a very unique situation. You may come from this area that has this type of background versus this area that has this type of background. And sometimes that sort of seeds into you some of these sort of things that you kind of need to realize that aren't normal across the world, stuff like that. And, I think you do a really excellent job of just kind of being realistic about that stuff too.
Well, most people are blind to their own biases.
Oh, right. Exactly.
Whereas, and I'm sure I'm guilty of that to some degree. I don't think you can be completely self-aware. It's
right.
Impossible to be completely self-aware. But I try and grade myself on a curve. So when I talk about a situation, I'll say, well, listen, I get it. I'm in this position. I'm from this area. I have this perspective. So everything I perceive is through that prism.
Right.
And just try and be fair with that. And listen, it's tough because sometimes I'm sure I can do a monologue maybe from a couple years ago that I'll listen to. Maybe I don't even agree with what I said.
Right. Yeah.
2 or 3 years ago. And part of that is just being in the moment and sometimes and this is why I really appreciate the written word, is because it can be a lot more meticulous. Whereas when I'm giving a monologue, it's not quite as pinpoint accurate in terms of, and maybe it'd be different if I wrote it out and just kind of read it off. But sometimes I ask myself, did I make a good argument? Did I cover every angle? Because I try and say it as if I'm listening to someone who's skeptical and who's picking it apart.
That's a good point right there. Absolutely. Yep. Definitely a good perspective on that one. So after you've moved to LA, you've kind of got your writing gig going on. You're starting to get some money, getting yourself established and stuff like that. What happens musically for you then?
So we do the Mates Hall tour in February 2015. And then at the end of the tour, the singer quits. And so we had offers to do a Whitesnake tour. And there was possibly a tour we were going to go to Israel because Mates Hall is Israeli. I thought that would have been amazing because I'd never been there.
You guys were blowing up too.
Yeah, it was, dude. Her record did great. She sold 8,000 records the first week. And dude, on tour, we were selling merch. We were a brand new band, a band that no one ever saw. And it was kind of at the level of engagement of God forbid was. And I was like, this is crazy to kind of come out the gate and have something work like this. And so I was encouraged. But with the singers split, and then she could never decide on a new singer. And I also think she did not really love touring.
Oh, yeah.
It was a little bit much for her. And we were all hired guns. So she was kind of picking up the tab on everything. So I think she lost some money on that tour.
Sure.
And so everything kind of slowed down, and I was pretty invested in that, but I was like, okay, it is what it is. And right around that time, Tommy had started recording songs that would be the Bad Wolf songs. At the time, the band was called Eye of Tongues. And I had been aware of the project. John kind of wanted me to join right when I moved to LA, but I was hesitant to do anything that was so heavy at the time. And that when he first started doing the project, it was really technical. The songs were 6-7 minutes, this crazy riffing, and it wasn't my headspace at the time.
Right. And
so when Tommy joined, his vocal style, the songs got shorter and more compact and a bit more commercial, which and just not as proggy. It was a little more streamlined.
Sure.
And I heard it and I was like, I think this is really something special. John wanted me to join the band. The one guitar player who had started the band didn't want to tour and it was kind of okay with the creative side, but didn't want to be in the band day to day. So that position opened up, and I was like, okay, let's do it. because I wasn't doing anything really at that time. And it was a real big challenge. The music it's kind of coming from that gent sound, that Meshuggah sound. And I'm a bit more old school. The stuff I did was, with God Forbid, was a lot more thrash based, and that whole kind of new wave American heavy metal style or metalcore style, whatever you want to call it. And I also was really gearing my stuff more towards rock. I started a band before I left New Jersey called Vegas Nerve, which was more kind of a rock with some prog kind of stuff in there. And that was more my speed. Truth be told, I almost felt that metal passed me by, like modern metal moved to a new phase. And I was like, I don't know if I can compete on this playing field. And I wasn't as passionate about the super heavy stuff. But when I heard the Bad Wolves stuff, it was like, well, this is competitive, and this is speaking to the moment and ahead of the curve. And it wasn't stuff I could write at that time. So yeah, it took a while to get familiar with the style. I still struggle with it to a certain degree, but it was a big challenge. But slowly but surely, the other guitar player, Chris, who was touring as a tech, came in, and we started jamming, and things started tightening up. And eventually we got Kyle in the band, and everything seemed a lot more solid. But it was a big adjustment. But I knew when I heard the music that this could be big. And that was the thing. It was like taking the Maytal project or things like that. It's being able to see something and see, okay, this can go somewhere, and you're kind of placing a bet with your time and efforts as far as what a project can be down the road. Because it's not like, hey, you get a call, hey, you want to join Slayer or something, where it's Slayer and you just show up and there it is. With both of these projects and some of the other stuff, you're helping build something from the ground up.
Right. Now, was the album already written when you came in, or were you still going?
So here's what it was. There was I want to say 10 songs or 11 songs were pretty much done before I joined. And what happened was the band didn't have a record deal. They had shopped the album to Nuclear Blast, who turned it down based on those 10 or 11 songs. And through that process, Tommy ended up filling in for Five Finger Death Punch.
Right.
And everything kind of changed because Zoltan got on board, and they didn't know what was going on with their situation. And they basically offered him a deal that, hey, I'll sign your band and I'll manage you guys as long as you can kind of be the backup for Ivan. They wanted to keep him in tow just in case anything happened.
Yeah. And
so that created this opportunity. At the time, Tommy had another band, Westfield Massacre, and he made a decision to quit Westfield Massacre and have Bad Wolves be the next thing.
Right.
And so when we got we put out this video for Learn to Live in, I want to say 2016 or 2015. I can't remember. It's all blended together. No, I think it was 2016 or 2017. Anyway, the years, I can't even tell them. That's what happens when you get old. But it kind of, we got turned down by the label, by Nuclear Blast, and this video hit, and kind of overnight, every record label, metal label, wanted to sign the band, because it kind of, and it was, we also changed the name to Bad Wolves.
Yeah.
Which I think it was a much more commercial name than Eye of Tongues.
Right. Yeah.
And so everything kind of came together when the video was released. And then we still didn't have a deal, but everyone wanted to sign us. But we really liked this Zoltan situation. And the label, which is called Better Noise now, called 11-7 then, they had Five Finger and Papa Roach and Motley Crue, and
heavy hitters, big time.
Yeah, but it was they had this real access into the radio world.
Right.
So we ended up writing 5 more songs in addition to those original 10. And so, like, No Masters, Officer Down, Hear Me Now, Remember When, all the singles, and a little bit, I'd say, Jesus Slaves, so it became, so a lot of those songs that were a part of the original 10 or 11 became B-sides, or even didn't even make that. So 4 or 5 songs. So it literally, by the time the record came out, half the record was a different band.
Yeah.
Almost.
And when I first
I did help out with that group of songs. I wasn't like the main writer, but I was involved. Yeah.
So in that first album, you know, when I first got it, and I was like, holy shit, these guys kick ass. But there was I could tell there was a very, you know, you had a very intense group of songs, and then you had these very melodic, I don't want to say radio friendly, but more.
They were.
I mean, it is what it is, but and you know, that was that, you know, remember
but
when,
that was the point. That was the
Yeah.
point. But you know, remember when was, you know, a song written with this guy, with Tommy wrote this guy, Drew Falk.
Right.
And then the guy Max, who used to be in the band, he did the instrumental part of it, so it kind of matched a little bit more. But you could tell it's different. The rest of the album, "Hear Me Now" was a song John had written as a pop song with this guy UC and Brandon, but then we all got together and made a rock version of it. It's kind of a rock ballad version of it, so that it would at least fit aesthetically with the album, despite it being different. And then Zombie was something Tommy already had.
Oh, really?
And so he had that. It was going to be on the Westfield Massacre record, but then he quit the band, so he just put out with Bad Wolves. So yeah, there's definitely a tonal difference. Somehow it worked, but it was a different vision. The band was going to be a different kind of band. And you know, if we just, let's say we signed with Nuclear Blast and weren't managed by Zoltan, maybe the band kind of becomes more of a metal band. And I imagine that's what would have happened. But different opportunities allow you to try different things because you have the ammunition to actually execute that plan.
Right.
Because you can have some quote unquote radio songs, but if you don't have the right team behind you, good luck.
Right. Well, and the thing, I mean, for me, the thing that I think that's great about your first album is that the diversity of those songs allows you to get as heavy as you want, but also get as, you know, sweet as you want or whatever. You know, it kind of, people accept it better. Whereas if you just put that first album that was just balls to the wall, and then you came out with something else,
look like you're selling out.
Exactly. So you kind of give yourself that approval to be diverse as a band.
Yeah, and that's the best thing. Always give them be diverse out the gate.
Yeah,
and that also, now you can do anything. Now nothing's unexpected, so you can have the lightest song and the heaviest song. And the next album, Nation, pretty much was that. I mean, you have some, you know, Sober, which is lighter than anything on previous album, and then you have songs like Forward Friend, which is heavier than anything that was on the last album. And they're literally back to back on the album, which is hilarious.
The cool thing is when that second album comes out, I'm like, all right, cool. I know you guys have this quite range, and I want to hear more. And that second album's usually that, and we'll talk about this in a second, I assume, but that second album's usually, all right, now you know the process. How do you expand your writing styles, your equipment, all that stuff into the writing of the second album? But before we talk to that, how did you, or what was the process for involving, because I know in Zombie you were originally going to have the original singer on there, but also on Diamante, I think. Was it
Diamante? Yeah,
Diamante was on the other. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, that was a total, the Dolores O'Riordan thing was, our label owner Alan Kovac used to manage the Cranberries, so there's a connection there. And the European label manager Dan Waite had a personal relationship with her and her family, so that's how a lot of that stuff got put together. It wasn't through us directly. And then Diamante, the version she did was it wasn't the album version. It was like a reimagining. So the album version has guitars and it's just Tommy singing on it. So they made a new basically when Zombie blew up, they wanted something that aesthetically kind of was more in line with that. So it has like pianos in the verses and stuff like that. And also just the band was tracking really well with female audiences. So we wanted to kind of feminize the track, and it worked really well. Man, that song, I think to this day, is still our second biggest streaming song, and the video has an insane amount of, it's like our second most video views compared to Zombie. And it's a great song. It's one of my favorite songs to play live. It's really good.
I mean, I love those songs. I mean, the Zombie, obviously everybody loves Zombie because that was a monster. My 7-year-old, my fiance, everyone loves that song. And you know, this is a very limited amount of songs we can all play on the radio together, and that's one of them. So
it's a timeless
you
track,
hit everything
man.
there. Yeah.
It's a timeless track, and the version, you know, just connected with people in a certain way. And it's, in some ways, it's much bigger than the band is. I mean, you look at the plays, the YouTube plays, all that stuff. It's, you know, people, I'm sure on TikTok, they're doing the song, and it's a testament to the original songwriters. They wrote something that, like I said, is timeless, and in our version connected, and it gave the band a career. It really did.
Hey, thanks for watching part 1 of our interview with Bad Wolves guitarist Doc Coyle. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and you can check out other guests on our YouTube page and on our website, talesfromthepit.net. We hope to see you next time.